The sun scorched the Arizona desert floor, each rippling heat wave a promise of death to those foolish enough to wander these parts unprepared. Faith Lockhart stumbled forward, her once pristine blue dress torn and stained with the red dust that stretched endlessly in every direction. Her bare feet, blistered and raw, left faint impressions in the sand that disappeared almost as quickly as she made them. 3 days ago, she had been traveling in a stagecoach bound for Tucson. Now, she was alone, thirsty, and beginning to hallucinate. The stagecoach robbery had been swift and brutal. The driver shot dead, the passengers robbed of everything valuable. Faith had managed to escape during the chaos, running blindly into the desert rather than face what the bandits had planned for the women. They'd even taken her boots, fine leather things that had cost her a month's wages from her position as a schoolteacher back east. Faith's parched lips cracked as she squinted at the horizon. Was that dust, a mirage, or perhaps death itself coming to claim her? She stumbled, fell to her knees, and then forced herself back up. Her father hadn't raised a quitter. Even if this desert would be her final resting place, she would die on her feet. The dust cloud grew larger. A rider. Faith's heart raced with both hope and fear. Friend or foe? In her condition, she had no strength to run or hide. All she could do was keep walking and pray. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. A deep voice called out, "Whoa there, Tempest!" The magnificent black stallion slowed to a stop about 20 yards from where Faith stood swaying. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work. His face was partially obscured by the wide brim of his hat, but she could see a strong jawline dusted with stubble. "Madam," he called, approaching cautiously. "You all right out here?" Faith tried to respond, but her throat was too dry. The world tilted sideways as her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. The last thing she remembered was the cool splash of water against her lips and a deep voice saying, "I've got you now. You're safe." When Faith regained consciousness, she was lying in the shade of a small outcropping of rocks. A canteen rested near her hand and a damp cloth lay across her forehead. She tried to sit up but found herself too weak. "Easy there," the same deep voice cautioned. "You're pretty badly sunburned and dehydrated." Faith turned her head to see the stranger sitting nearby, whittling a piece of wood with a pocket knife. Without his hat, she could see his features clearly now: sharp blue eyes, strong nose, and hair the color of burnished copper that fell just past his ears. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. He nodded, setting aside his whittling. "Name's Matthew Quincy. Most folks call me Matt. I ranch about 15 miles north of here." "Faith Lockhart," she replied, accepting the canteen he offered and taking small sips as he'd instructed. "I was on the Tucson stage when bandits attacked." Matt's expression darkened. "The Holbrook gang. They've been terrorizing these parts for months now." His eyes traveled down to her bare, blistered feet, and his frown deepened. "They took your boots." "Everything of value," Faith confirmed. "I ran during the commotion, been walking for, I'm not sure how long." 3 days, I'd reckon, based on those blisters," Matt said, shaking his head. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Lockhart." He stood up and walked to his horse, returning with a pair of worn leather boots. "These are my spare pair. They'll be too big, but they'll protect your feet better than nothing at all." Faith stared at the offering, momentarily speechless by this unexpected kindness. "I couldn't possibly." "I insist," Matt said firmly. "We've got a long ride ahead of us, and you can't exactly sit a horse barefoot." "A long ride," Faith echoed. "To Bentonville. It's the nearest town, about 30 miles southwest of here. I've got a friend there, Doc Wilson, who can tend to those feet properly." Faith looked at the boots again, then at the vast expanse of desert around them. She had no choice but to trust this stranger. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy." "Matt," he corrected, turning away to give her privacy as she slipped the oversized boots onto her tender feet. He'd thoughtfully stuffed the toes with cloth to make them somewhat more manageable. When she finished, he helped her stand, his strong hands steadying her as she wobbled. The boots felt strange, too big and smelling of leather and a man's sweat, but they were infinitely better than bare feet on scorching sand. "Think you can ride?" Matt asked. Faith nodded, determined not to be a burden. "I grew up riding in Virginia, though it's been a few years." Matt seemed impressed. "Tempest is gentle enough, despite his name." He helped her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. "You'll have to excuse the closeness, Miss Lockhart. It's not proper, but it's necessary." Faith felt herself blush despite her sunburn. The solid warmth of his chest against her back was both reassuring and disconcerting. "Under the circumstances, Mr. Quimat, I think propriety is the least of my concerns." She felt rather than heard his chuckle as he clicked his tongue, urging Tempest into a walk. "Fair enough. Now, why don't you tell me what brings a Virginia lady all the way out to Arizona territory?" As they rode, Faith shared her story. After her parents died of influenza 2 years earlier, she'd taken a position as a schoolteacher in Boston. When the opportunity arose to teach in the growing town of Tucson, she'd decided a fresh start in the West was exactly what she needed. "So you're an educated woman," Matt remarked without judgment. "Tucson's lucky to be getting a new teacher. Their last one married a miner and moved to California." "That seems to be the fate of many school teachers out west," Faith observed, "though I've no plans to marry." "My teaching is my calling." Matt was silent for a moment. "The West changes people, Miss Lockhart. For better or worse, you won't be the same person after a year out here." They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythm of Tempest's hooves lulling Faith into a state between wakefulness and sleep. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "We'll need to make camp soon," Matt announced. "There's a small spring about 2 miles ahead. We can rest there for the night and reach Bentonville by tomorrow afternoon." Faith nodded, too exhausted to argue. The thought of sleeping under the stars both frightened and exhilarated her. Everything about this land was both beautiful and dangerous, including, perhaps, the man whose arms encircled her as they rode. The spring was little more than a trickle emerging from between rocks, creating a small pool before disappearing back into the sandy soil. But it was enough. Matt helped Faith dismount, supporting her weight as her legs trembled with fatigue. He set about making camp with practiced efficiency, unsaddling Tempest, gathering what sparse kindling could be found, and preparing a small fire. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and to Faith's surprise, a small tin of peaches. "Save these for a special occasion," he explained with a slight smile. "Reckon saving a lady from certain death qualifies." Faith couldn't help but laugh, the sound startling in the vastness of the desert. "When you put it that way, Mr. Quincy, I feel positively honored." Their eyes met across the small fire, and something unspoken passed between them. Faith looked away first, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. Her once fashionable traveling dress was filthy and torn, her hair a tangled mess, her face burned and peeling from the sun. "Here," Matt said, handing her a clean bandana and gesturing to the spring. "It's not much, but you might feel better after washing up a bit." Faith accepted the cloth gratefully. "You're very kind." "Just doing what anyone would," he replied, turning his attention to Tempest to give her privacy. After washing her face and hands and doing what she could with her hair, Faith rejoined Matt by the fire. They shared the simple meal, the peaches a glorious burst of sweetness after days of thirst and hunger. "How did you come to be a rancher in Arizona territory?" Faith asked as they ate. Matt stared into the fire. "Came out west after the war. Fought for the Union but didn't much like what I saw on either side. Figured I'd find someplace where a man could start fresh." He poked at the embers with a stick. "Worked cattle drives for a few years, saved up enough to buy my own spread. It's not much, just 100 acres with a small herd, but it's mine." "Do you have family?" Faith asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Had a brother, lost him at Gettysburg." Matt's voice was flat. "Parents passed before the war, there's just me now." He glanced up at her. "What about you?" "Any family besides the parents you mentioned?" Faith shook her head. "I was an only child. My parents were older when they had me, a surprise blessing, my mother used to say. After they died, there was no reason to stay in Virginia. So we're both alone in the world, Matt observed. I suppose we are, Faith agreed softly. The night deepened around them, stars appearing in breathtaking profusion. Faith had never seen so many, even on the clearest nights in Virginia. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. It's beautiful, she whispered. It is, Matt agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the sky. Faith felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. I should rest, she said quickly. Matt nodded, unrolling a bedroll for her near the fire. Take this, I'll keep watch. But where will you sleep? I'll be fine, he assured her. Used to sleeping rough. Faith wanted to protest but was too exhausted. She settled onto the bedroll, surprised by its comfort after days of sleeping on bare ground. Thank you, Matt, for everything. Sleep well, Miss Lockhart, he replied softly. Despite her exhaustion, Faith lay awake for some time, watching Matt's profile as he sat against a boulder, his rifle across his knees. There was something comforting about his vigilance, about knowing someone was watching over her. It had been a long time since she'd felt protected. Eventually, sleep claimed her, and she drifted into dreams filled with endless deserts and a copper-haired cowboy whose boots saved her life. Dawn came early in the desert. Faith woke to the smell of coffee brewing over a small fire. Matt knelt beside it, his back to her, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the pink-gold light of sunrise. Morning, he said without turning. Coffee's almost ready. Faith sat up, wincing as her sunburned skin protested. You must have eyes in the back of your head. Matt turned, a slight smile playing at his lips. Your breathing changed when you woke up. He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. How are your feet feeling? Faith flexed her toes experimentally. Better than yesterday, though I'm grateful for your boots. They shared a simple breakfast of more jerky and hardtack, then broke camp. The day promised to be hot, but not as scorching as the previous one. As Matt helped Faith onto Tempest, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. We should reach Bentonville by midday, he told her as he mounted behind her. What kind of town is it? Faith asked as they set out. Small but growing. Got a general store, a saloon, a church that doubles as a schoolhouse, and about 50 permanent residents. It's the center for several ranches in the area, including mine. And this doctor you mentioned, Doc Wilson. Good man. Served as a surgeon during the war, came out here to get away from the memories, I reckon. They rode steadily through the morning, the landscape gradually changing from open desert to scattered mesquite and low hills. Faith found herself increasingly aware of Matt's presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the occasional brush of his beard against her hair when he leaned forward to point something out, the strength in the arms that encircled her to hold the reins. It was strangely intimate, this closeness forced upon them by circumstances. Faith had never been so physically close to a man who wasn't a relative, yet she felt no fear, only a curious sense of rightness. Around midday, they crested a low rise, and Faith saw the town spread out before them in the valley below. Bentonville was indeed small, a single dusty main street with wooden buildings flanking either side, a church steeple rising at the far end. Not much to look at, Matt admitted, but it's home. As they rode down the main street, Faith was acutely aware of the curious stares from townspeople. A woman in a torn dress, wearing men's boots, riding with the town's reclusive rancher, she could only imagine the gossip that would follow. Matt drew Tempest to a halt in front of a small building with a sign reading Wilson Physician and Surgeon. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Faith down. The world spun briefly as her feet touched the ground, and she grabbed Matt's arms for support. Easy now, he murmured, his blue eyes concerned. You've been through a lot. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a thin man with spectacles and a salt and pepper beard. Matt Quincy, he exclaimed, twice in 1 month, the world must be ending. His eyes fell on Faith, and his expression turned professional. Bring her in. Dr. Wilson's examination room was small but meticulously clean. He insisted on examining Faith alone, sending Matt to wait outside despite his reluctance to leave her. "That man hasn't voluntarily come to town in months," the doctor remarked as he gently cleaned Faith's blistered feet. "Yet here he is, bringing in a woman he found in the desert. Interesting." Faith winced as he applied a cooling salve to her feet. "He saved my life." "That he did," the doctor agreed. "Those blisters are infected. Without treatment, blood poisoning would have set in within days." He peered at her over his spectacles. "You're suffering from severe sunburn and dehydration as well, young lady. You need rest, plenty of water, and proper nutrition." "I have nowhere to stay," Faith admitted. "I was on my way to Tucson for a teaching position." "Well, we can't send you anywhere for at least a week, not with those feet. I'll speak with Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house. She sometimes takes in women in difficult circumstances." After bandaging her feet and giving her a tonic for the dehydration, Dr. Wilson allowed Matt back into the room. The rancher had clearly been pacing, his face lined with worry. "She'll be fine," the doctor assured him, "but she needs rest and care for at least a week." Matt nodded, relief evident on his face. "I've arranged a room at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house," he said to Faith, "and sent word to the sheriff about the stage robbery. He's going to telegraph Tucson about your position." Faith was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need," Matt said gruffly. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Dr. Wilson muttered, exchanging a knowing look with Faith. "Mrs. Abernathy turned out to be a plump, motherly woman in her 60s who clucked sympathetically over Faith's condition. "You poor dear," she exclaimed, leading them to a small but comfortable room on the second floor of her boarding house. "Attacked by bandits and wandering the desert for days. It's a miracle Mr. Quincy found you when he did." She bustled about, arranging pillows and fetching extra blankets. "Now, I've set out some clothes that should fit you. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to California, and I'll have a hot bath brought up immediately." Faith nearly wept at the thought of a real bath. "You're very kind, Mrs. Abernathy." "Nonsense," the older woman declared. "We take care of our own in Bentonville." She shot a speculative look between Faith and Matt. "And any friend of Mr. Quincy's is welcome indeed." After Mrs. Abernathy left to arrange the bath, an awkward silence fell between Faith and Matt. He stood by the door, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I should let you rest," he finally said. Faith nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Will I see you again before I leave for Tucson?" Something flickered in Matt's eyes. "I'll check on you tomorrow, make sure you're settling in all right." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad I found you, Miss Lockhart." "Faith," she corrected gently. "After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. "Faith," he repeated as if tasting the word. "Rest well." After he left, Faith sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. From near death in the desert to rescue by a handsome, taciturn rancher to safety in this small frontier town, it seemed more like a dime novel than real life. The promised bath arrived, and Faith nearly cried with pleasure as she sank into the warm water. She scrubbed away days of desert dust and fear, feeling human again for the first time since the stage robbery. Mrs. Abernathy's daughter's clothes fit reasonably well, a simple calico dress and undergarments that, while not fashionable, were clean and comfortable. Later, over a dinner of chicken stew and fresh bread that tasted like heaven after days of near starvation, Mrs. Abernathy filled Faith in on Bentonville and its residents. "Town's named after Josiah Benton, founded it back in '58 during the Silver Rush," she explained. "Silver played out, but the town survived as a supply stop and center for the cattle ranches." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Speaking of ranchers, you certainly made an impression on our Matt Quincy." Faith felt herself blush. "He saved my life, nothing more, Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. Matt Quincy barely speaks 2 words to anyone in town unless absolutely necessary. Been that way since he came back from that cattle drive 3 years ago. Whatever happened out there changed him. She patted Faith's hand. Yet here he is, riding into town with a pretty young woman and looking at her like she hung the moon. You're mistaken, Faith insisted, though her heart beat faster at the thought. Mr. Quincy was simply being a good Samaritan. If you say so, dear Mrs. Abernathy replied, clearly unconvinced. Though I should warn you, half the unmarried women in town have set their caps for him without success. His ranch is small but profitable, and he's the handsomest man for 50 miles, wore scars and all. Wore scars, Faith echoed, on his back and shoulder. Shrapnel, I believe. My late husband saw them once when they were repairing a windmill, said they were bad enough to have killed a lesser man. Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. This country's full of men carrying scars, visible and otherwise. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in days, Faith found her thoughts returning to Matt. There was something compelling about him beyond his obvious physical attributes, a depth of character, a quiet strength that drew her despite her better judgment. She had come west to teach, not to fall for the first man who showed her kindness. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was his voice she heard, his blue eyes she saw, his hands she remembered, gentle despite their roughness. True to his word, Matt appeared at the boarding house the following morning. Faith was sitting on the front porch, her bandaged feet propped on a footstool, enjoying the relative coolness of the morning. You're looking better, he observed, settling into the chair beside her. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His copper hair was neatly combed, his shirt clean, his face freshly shaved except for the neat mustache that framed his upper lip. Amazing what a bath, proper food, and a good night's sleep can do, Faith replied with a smile. Dr. Wilson came by earlier. He says I'm healing well, though I should stay off my feet as much as possible for the next few days. Matt nodded, his expression relieved. Sheriff Thomas also stopped by to see you. Yes, he took my statement about the robbery. He says the Tucson School Board is willing to hold my position for 2 weeks, giving me time to recover before traveling. That's good news, Matt said, though something in his tone suggested he might not entirely mean it. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the town come to life. Across the street, the general store owner swept his porch. A wagon laden with supplies rumbled past. 2 women paused in their shopping to stare curiously at Faith and Matt before continuing on their way, heads bent in obvious gossip. Small towns, Matt said with a wry smile. By sundown, they'll have us engaged to be married. Faith laughed despite herself. Mrs. Abernathy has already hinted as much. That woman's been trying to marry me off since I arrived, Matt grumbled, though without heat. Seems to think a wife would settle me down. And would it? Faith asked impulsively. Matt looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. Depends on the woman. The air between them suddenly felt charged. Faith broke eye contact first, looking down at her bandaged feet. Well, she needn't worry about me. I'll be gone to Tucson as soon as Dr. Wilson permits. Something like disappointment flickered across Matt's face. Of course, your teaching position. It's what I came west for, Faith reminded him and herself. Matt nodded, standing abruptly. I should let you rest. I've got supplies to pick up. Before Faith could respond, he was striding down the street toward the general store, his back straight, his movements stiff. She watched him go, confused by his sudden change in demeanor and by her own conflicted feelings. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Matt would visit each morning, bringing small gifts, a book from his personal collection, wildflowers gathered on his ride to town, a jar of honey from his own beehives. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, his experiences during the war, her childhood in Virginia, books they'd both read, dreams they'd both harbored in the afternoons. He would attend to business in town while Faith rested. Sometimes they would meet again in the evening, sitting on the boarding house porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Faith found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. Matt was unlike any man she'd known back east, straightforward yet complex, educated despite his frontier manners, strong but gentle. She learned he reads Shakespeare by lamplight during the long winter evenings, that he could quote Emerson and Thoreau, that he played the harmonica with surprising skill. The town noticed their growing closeness. Faith caught the speculative glances, heard the whispers that stopped when she approached. Mrs. Abernathy was beside herself with pleasure, dropping unsubtle hints about how lovely spring weddings could be in Arizona. "You're encouraging false hopes," Faith told her landlady one evening after a particularly pointed comment about how Matt's ranch house could use a woman's touch. Mrs. Abernathy just smiled. "Am I? That man rides 10 miles each way every day just to sit and talk with you. I've known Matt Quincy for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Faith's heart fluttered traitorously. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, I have obligations, a contract with the Tucson School Board." "Contracts can be broken," Mrs. Abernathy replied sagely. "Hearts are harder to mend." On the 5th day after her rescue, Dr. Wilson declared Faith well enough to put weight on her feet again, though she should still avoid prolonged walking. "Another week of rest," he pronounced, "and you'll be fit enough for the stage to Tucson." Faith thanked him, ignoring the unexpected pang at his words. A week. 7 more days in Bentonville. 7 more days with Matt before she would likely never see him again. When Matt arrived that morning and heard the doctor's assessment, a shadow crossed his face. "That's good news," he said, his tone neutral. "Yes," Faith agreed, equally neutral. They sat in uncharacteristic silence until Matt suddenly stood. "Would you like to see my ranch?" he asked abruptly. Faith blinked in surprise. "Your ranch? It's not far less than an hour's ride. Doc Wilson says you can be up and about, and I thought—" He faltered, then straightened his shoulders. "I thought you might like to see where I live before you go." The invitation felt significant somehow, like a door opening between them. "I'd like that very much," Faith said softly. Matt's expression brightened. "I'll borrow Mrs. Abernathy's buggy. Better for your feet than riding horseback." An hour later, they were heading north out of town, Matt handling the reins of the small buggy with the same easy competence he showed in everything. Faith sat beside him, acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of soap and leather, the way the sun brought out red-gold highlights in his hair, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as he guided the horses. The landscape opened around them, the town falling away behind as they traversed rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. In the distance, mountains rose blue and mysterious against the sky. "It's beautiful," Faith murmured, drinking in the vastness of it. Matt nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with evident pride. "Different from Virginia, I expect. Very different, but there's something compelling about this land, so open and honest, no pretense." "That's why I stayed," Matt said quietly. After the war, all the social niceties back east seemed false. Out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his family name or how he talks. They crested a small rise and Matt drew the buggy to a halt. "There it is, Quincy Ranch." Below them lay a small valley, green with spring grass. A creek meandered through it, its banks lined with cottonwoods. Near the center stood a neat cabin with a covered porch, a barn, corral, and several outbuildings. A small herd of cattle grazed peacefully nearby. "It's not much compared to the big spreads," Matt said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "It's perfect," Faith breathed, meaning it. There was an ordered beauty to the place, a sense of careful stewardship. Matt's expression softened as he looked at her. "Let me show you around." The cabin was simple but well built, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and kitchen, and a bedroom at the back. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that would have done credit to many Eastern libraries. A guitar stood in one corner, alongside a comfortable-looking armchair. "You play guitar as well as harmonica?" Faith asked, trailing her fingers along the instrument. Not well, Matt admitted, but it passes the time on winter evenings. Faith tried to imagine him here alone, reading by firelight, playing music to empty rooms. Something ached in her chest at the thought. Outside, he showed her the garden where he grew vegetables, the chicken coop that provided eggs, the spring house where he kept milk and butter cool. Pride was evident in every word as he explained the improvements he'd made, the plans he had for expansion. I'm thinking of adding an orchard next year, he said as they walked slowly back toward the house, Faith leaning on his arm for support. Apples do well in this climate with proper care. It would be lovely, Faith agreed, trying not to think about how she wouldn't be there to see the trees blossom or bear fruit. They stopped on the porch, looking out over the valley. The afternoon light was turning golden, casting long shadows across the grass. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound haunting and wild. I could be happy here, Faith thought, the realization both welcome and terrifying. As if reading her mind, Matt turned to her. Faith, he began, his voice low and serious. I know you have plans, a position waiting in Tucson. But these past few days, he broke off as the sound of approaching riders reached them. 3 men on horseback were coming up the trail from the main road. Matt's expression darkened. Trouble, he muttered, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. Stay here. He strode out to meet the riders, his posture alert but not openly hostile. Faith watched anxiously from the porch as the men drew to a halt about 20 yards from the house. Even at a distance, she could tell these weren't ordinary travelers. Their clothes were dusty and unkempt, their manner arrogant as they sat their horses looking down at Matt. The leader, a tall man with a shock of white blonde hair, gestured expressively as he spoke, his voice carrying on the clear air. Just a friendly warning, Quincy. The Cattlemen's Association doesn't take kindly to small operators refusing to join. Accidents happen to lone ranchers. Matt's response was too quiet to hear, but his stance remained firm. The blond man laughed, an ugly sound. Your choice, but don't say we didn't warn you. His eyes shifted to the porch, landing on Faith. Pretty company you've got there. Be a shame if anything happened to her. In one smooth motion, Matt drew his pistol. That's enough, Blackburn. Get off my land. The 3 men backed their horses away, the leader still laughing. Think about our offer, Quincy. Won't be open forever. After they disappeared down the trail, Matt returned to the porch, his face grim. Who were they? Faith asked, her heart still racing from the encounter. Wade Blackburn and his men, Matt replied, holstering his pistol. He manages the Big Diamond Ranch for Eastern investors. Been trying to drive smaller ranchers out, force them to sell cheap or join their association on unfavorable terms. He threatened you, Faith said, fear clutching at her heart. And me. Matt's expression softened as he looked at her. I shouldn't have brought you here, put you at risk. Nonsense, Faith said firmly. You couldn't have known they would come. She hesitated, then added more softly, I'm glad you showed me your home. Something shifted in Matt's eyes. He took a step closer, his hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. Before we were interrupted, I was trying to say something. Faith's pulse quickened. Yes, these past days with you, they've meant something to me, more than something. He took a deep breath. I know we haven't known each other long. I know you have plans that don't include staying in Bentonville, but I can't let you go to Tucson without asking if there's any chance. He faltered, then tried again. Is there any chance you might consider staying here with me? Faith stared at him, her heart pounding. This was madness. She barely knew this man. She had a position waiting, a career planned. She couldn't possibly throw it all away for a frontier romance that might not last. But looking up into Matt's earnest blue eyes, feeling the gentle touch of his calloused hand against her cheek, Faith knew with sudden clarity that leaving would be the greater risk. She had come west seeking a new life, never imagining it might include love. Yes, she whispered, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. There's a chance. Joy blazed across Matt's face. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head and kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss tender yet holding the promise of passion. When they parted, both were breathing faster. Matt rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I know it's too soon," he murmured. "I know we should wait, court properly. But when I found you in that desert, something changed for me, like I'd been waiting for you without knowing it." Faith understood exactly what he meant. From the moment he'd caught her as she collapsed, something had shifted in her world. As if pieces she hadn't known were missing suddenly fell into place. "We should head back to town," Matt said reluctantly, straightening. "It'll be dark soon, and after Blackburn's visit, I don't want to risk the trail at night." The ride back to Bentonville was filled with a new awareness between them. They spoke of practical matters. Faith would need to write to the Tucson School Board declining the position. Matt would speak with the town council about the possibility of Faith teaching in Bentonville when the current teacher retired later that year. Yet beneath the practicalities ran a current of excitement, of possibilities opening before them like the vast Arizona sky. Mrs. Abernathy took one look at their faces when they returned and broke into a knowing smile. "Well, it's about time," she declared, bustling about to serve them a late supper. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." The following days passed in a blur of happiness for Faith. Her feet healed rapidly, allowing her to explore Bentonville on Matt's arm. They became a familiar sight in town, the tall rancher and the Eastern schoolteacher, walking together, talking, laughing. Not everyone approved. Faith overheard whispers questioning her character, her motives. Some suggested she was a fortune hunter, others that Matt was being taken advantage of by a clever Eastern woman. But the majority of townspeople, led by Mrs. Abernathy and Dr. Wilson, welcomed their courtship with enthusiasm. A week after their first kiss, Matt formally proposed. They were sitting on the boarding house porch watching the sunset, his large hand enfolding her smaller one. "I know it's quick," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "And I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch is small, the house plain. But I can promise you this: you'll never lack for love or respect. I'll work every day to be worthy of you." Faith's eyes filled with tears. "The ranch is beautiful, the house is perfect, and you are already more than worthy," she told him fiercely. "Yes, Matthew Quincy, I will marry you." His kiss was jubilant, drawing whoops and hollers from passers-by that made Faith blush, but didn't dampen their joy. They planned a simple ceremony for the following month, giving them time to make preparations and for Faith to obtain her personal belongings from storage in Boston. The Bentonville church would host the wedding, with Reverend Parker officiating, but their happiness was soon overshadowed. 3 nights after their engagement, Faith was awakened by urgent pounding on the boarding house door. She rushed downstairs to find Matt standing there, his face grim in the lamplight. "Blackburn's men drove off half my herd," he said without preamble, "and burned one of my outbuildings." Fear clutched at Faith's heart. "Were you hurt?" "No. I wasn't. There was having dinner with the Wilsons in town." His expression darkened. "They knew I was away, must have been watching." "What will you do?" Faith asked, reaching for his hand. "Sheriff Thomas is organizing a posse at First Light to track the cattle." Matt's fingers tightened around hers. "I wanted you to hear it from me before rumors started." "Be careful," Faith pleaded, suddenly terrified. "Blackburn is dangerous." "I will." Matt's kiss was brief but fierce. "Lock your door tonight." The next 24 hours were the longest of Faith's life. She paced Mrs. Abernathy's parlor, unable to concentrate on anything, jumping at every sound from the street. When Matt finally returned late the following evening, exhausted and dusty but unharmed, Faith flew into his arms, heedless of propriety. "We recovered most of the cattle," he told her as they sat in the boarding house kitchen, Matt devouring the meal Mrs. Abernathy had kept warm. "But Blackburn's men got away. Sheriff couldn't find enough evidence to arrest him." "Will they try again?" Faith asked, fear making her voice sharp. Matt's expression was grim. "Probably. Blackburn wants my water rights. That creek on my property is valuable." "Then sell the ranch," Faith urged. We can go somewhere else, start over. Matt looked at her in surprise. You'd be willing to leave, go somewhere new? I left Virginia for Boston, Boston for Tucson. I'm quite good at starting over, Faith said with a small smile. Besides, home is where you are now. Matt's expression softened. He reached across the table to take her hand. I won't be driven off my land by thugs like Blackburn, but I won't risk your safety either. He was silent for a moment, thinking, there might be another way. The other way turned out to be a meeting of the independent ranchers in the area, hosted at the Bentonville church 3 days later. 12 men gathered, their faces weathered and serious as Matt explained his plan. Alone, we're vulnerable to Blackburn and the Cattlemen's Association. Together, we could form our own cooperative, share resources for protection, negotiate better prices with the buyers. There was skepticism at first. These were independent men used to handling their own affairs. But as Matt outlined the benefits: mutual protection, shared costs for expensive equipment, better bargaining power, Faith could see them warming to the idea. By meeting's end, all 12 had agreed to form the Bentonville Ranchers Cooperative, with Matt elected as president. Their first act would be to establish a rotating patrol of ranch lands to deter further raids. You were magnificent, Faith told Matt afterward as they walked back to the boarding house. I had no idea you were such an orator. Matt looked embarrassed by the praise. Just practical thinking. My father was a union organizer back east before he bought our farm, taught me the power of collective action. Well, your father would be proud, Faith said firmly. As am I. Their wedding took place on a perfect May morning, the church filled with wildflowers and well-wishers. Faith wore a simple ivory dress ordered from Tucson, while Matt cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. As they exchanged vows before Reverend Parker, Faith thought of the strange twists of fate that had brought her here: a stagecoach robbery, days wandering barefoot in the desert, and a cowboy who had given her his boots. Had any of those elements been different, she might never have found this happiness. After the ceremony, the entire town celebrated with a feast in the churchyard. There was dancing, laughter, and more food than Faith had seen since leaving Boston. Even Sheriff Thomas unbent enough to offer a toast to the couple's happiness. As the sun began to set, Matt led his new wife to the waiting buggy, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children. They would spend their wedding night at the ranch, their home now. Are you happy, Mrs. Quincy? Matt asked as they drove away from town, the sounds of celebration fading behind them. Faith leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. Completely. Their first months of marriage passed in blissful adjustment. Faith learned to cook on a wood stove, to make soap from lye and fat, to manage a vegetable garden in the harsh Arizona climate. Matt expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom for the future with a shy smile that made Faith blush. The Ranchers Cooperative proved successful beyond their hopes. With 20 members by summer's end, they effectively countered the Cattlemen's Association's influence. Blackburn made no further moves against any of the independent ranchers, though his sullen glares when they met in town spoke of simmering resentment. In August, Bentonville's schoolteacher announced her retirement earlier than expected, having received a proposal from a silver miner in Colorado. The town council unanimously offered the position to Faith, who accepted with delight. Now I have the best of both worlds, she told Matt as they celebrated the news. Teaching by day, ranching by night. And I have the smartest wife in the territory, Matt replied with a proud smile. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Weekdays, Faith taught in the one-room schoolhouse, returning to the ranch each afternoon. Weekends were spent working together on endless ranch chores, mending fences, tending livestock, preserving food for winter. In November, as the first chill of autumn crept into the air, Faith made a special dinner to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. Over apple pie made from fruit traded with a neighbor, she shared her news. I won't be able to teach next fall, she said, watching Matt's face carefully. At least not for a while. Confusion furrowed his brow. Why not? Has the council because, Faith interrupted gently, it wouldn't be proper in my condition. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. You're with child, Matt whispered, awe and disbelief mingling in his voice. Faith nodded, suddenly nervous. Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. The baby should arrive in May, near our first anniversary. Matt was around the table in an instant, lifting her from her chair and spinning her in a circle, his laughter echoing through the cabin. A baby, our baby. You're pleased then? Faith asked, laughing as he set her down. Pleased, Faith Quincy, I'm ecstatic. He dropped to his knees before her, resting his hands reverently on her still flat stomach. A family of our own. That winter was harsh by Arizona standards. Snow dusted the higher elevations, and icy winds whipped across the valley. But inside the Quincy cabin, all was warmth and preparation. Matt built a cradle from cottonwood, its edges sanded satin smooth. Faith sewed tiny garments from flannel and cotton, each stitch a prayer for the child growing within her. The entire town seemed to share in their anticipation. Students brought gifts for their teacher's baby, a hand-carved rattle, a tiny pair of moccasins, a patchwork quilt made by the older girls under Mrs. Abernathy's guidance. Spring brought renewal to the land and anticipation to the Quincy household. The garden was planted, calves were born, and Faith's belly grew round with new life. On a perfect May morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Faith felt the first pains. Matt rode for Dr. Wilson at a gallop, returning with both the doctor and Mrs. Abernathy, who insisted on coming to help. After 12 hours of labor, Faith gave birth to a healthy son with a shock of copper hair like his father's. As she held him to her breast for the first time, exhausted but triumphant, Faith looked up to see Matt watching them with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. He's perfect, Matt whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and reaching out a tentative finger to touch his son's cheek. What shall we call him? Faith asked. Matt considered for a moment. How about Thomas, after my brother who died at Gettysburg, Thomas Lockhart Quincy? Faith smiled, loving the way the names honored both their families. It's perfect. Hello, Thomas, she murmured to the infant, who blinked up at his parents with unfocused blue eyes. Life with a baby brought new challenges and joys. Faith took a year's leave from teaching, devoting herself to Thomas and the ranch. Matt proved to be a devoted father, often carrying his son in a sling across his chest as he did his chores, talking to the baby about cattle, weather, and the land that would someday be his. By Thomas's first birthday, the ranchers' cooperative had grown to 30 members and built a small slaughterhouse, allowing them to command better prices for their beef. Matt was often busy with cooperative business, but always made time for his family. When Thomas was 18 months old, Faith discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and the following spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose. One of each, Matt said proudly, holding his daughter while Thomas peered curiously at his new sister from Faith's lap. Our family's complete, but life in the West was never entirely peaceful. The summer after Elizabeth's birth brought drought, forcing difficult decisions about which cattle to sell and which to try to maintain. Then, autumn brought a resurgence of tension with the Cattlemen's Association when Wade Blackburn was appointed to the Territorial Water Commission. He'll try to restrict our water rights, Matt told Faith grimly after returning from a contentious town meeting. Claims the big ranches need priority access during drought years. Can he do that? Faith asked, alarmed. Not if we fight him. Matt's expression was determined. The cooperative has enough influence now to challenge him legally. The water rights battle dragged on through the winter, consuming Matt's time and energy. Faith worried about the strain on him, the new lines that appeared on his face, the way he sometimes rode out before dawn and returned after dark. The situation came to a head in early spring when Blackburn confronted Matt outside the general store. Faith was inside with the children when she heard raised voices. Looking through the window, she saw the two men standing toe to toe, Blackburn's finger jabbing at Matt's chest. Your cooperative won't save you, Quincy, Blackburn snarled, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I've got the territorial governor's ear now. One word from me and your water rights are history. Matt stood his ground. This isn't just about me, Blackburn. You're threatening the livelihoods of 30 families. Back off while you still can. Blackburn sneered. Or what? You'll set your schoolteacher wife on me. What happened next occurred so quickly Faith barely registered it. Matt's fist connected with Blackburn's jaw, sending the taller man sprawling in the dust. Before Blackburn could recover, Sheriff Thomas stepped between them. That's enough, the sheriff said firmly. Blackburn, I heard you making threats. That's the second time this month. One more incident and I'm wiring the federal marshal. Faith hurried outside, pulling Thomas by the hand while balancing Elizabeth on her hip. Matt, are you all right? Matt flexed his hand, his expression grim. Fine. Take the children home. I need to speak with the sheriff. That evening, after the children were asleep, Matt explained the new development. The sheriff received a telegraph from Phoenix. The territorial governor is sending an investigator to look into allegations of corruption in the Water Commission. Because of Blackburn? Faith asked. Matt nodded. Turns out we weren't the only ones filing complaints. Several towns downstream have reported suspicious rulings favoring the big ranches. He took Faith's hand. This could be the break we need. The investigator arrived the following week, a sharp-eyed lawyer from Phoenix who conducted thorough interviews throughout the county. 2 weeks later, Blackburn was removed from the Water Commission, and rumors circulated that he might face criminal charges. It's over, Matt told Faith as they sat on their porch watching a spectacular sunset. 3-year-old Thomas played with wooden blocks nearby while Elizabeth slept in her mother's arms. The new Water Commission has guaranteed equal rights to all property owners. I'm so proud of you, Faith said softly. You stood up not just for us, but for everyone. Matt shook his head. I couldn't have done it without the cooperative, without you. He looked out over his land, their land, his expression contemplative. Sometimes I think about that day, 5 years ago, when I was riding back from Yuma and saw something strange in the desert. A sunburned woman in a torn dress, walking barefoot through the sand, Faith supplied with a smile. The most beautiful sight I'd ever seen, Matt corrected, leaning over to kiss her. Even half dead from dehydration, you were magnificent, Faith laughed. Hardly my finest moment. It was the moment that changed everything. Matt's expression grew serious. Do you ever regret it? Not going to Tucson? Taking a chance on a rancher you barely knew? Faith looked around at their home, their children, the life they'd built together. From the disaster of a stage robbery had come the greatest blessings of her life. Never, she said firmly. Not for a single moment. As night fell over the Quincy ranch, Faith thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. A woman walking barefoot through the desert. A cowboy who gave her his boots. And in that simple act of kindness, the foundation of a love that would last a lifetime. 10 years later, the Quincy ranch had grown to 300 acres. The original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable house with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a library filled with books for their now 4 children: Thomas, Elizabeth, Sarah, and young James. Faith still taught at the Bentonville school, though now as headmistress overseeing 3 teachers. The town had grown along with the Quincy family, boasting a bank, a proper doctor's office, 2 churches, and even a small newspaper. On warm evenings, the family often gathered on the wide front porch. Matt would play his guitar while the children sang or Faith read aloud from one of their favorite books. Sometimes they'd reminisce about the early days, the formation of the cooperative, the water rights battle, the births of each child. But the story the children requested most often was the one about how their parents met. Tell us again, Mama. 8-year-old Elizabeth would beg. About when you were walking barefoot through the desert, and Papa gave you his boots. And Faith would smile at Matt across their children's heads, remembering the desperate young woman she had been and the taciturn cowboy who had saved more than just her life that day. Well, she would begin. It was the hottest day in June, and I was certain I was going to die beneath that merciless sun.